The crystal chandelier, worth more than most people's homes, trembled as another thunderous crash echoed through Richard Blackstone's Manhattan penthouse. At 3:47 a.m., the billionaire tech mogul jolted awake for the fourth time that night, his silk pajamas drenched in cold sweat. The sound of splintering wood and shattering glass had become his nightly soundtrack, symphony of destruction, conducted by 120 pounds of pure, uncontrollable fury. Thunder, his German Shepherd rescue, was at it again. Blackstone stumbled through his 8,000-square-foot penthouse, dodging the remnants of what used to be a $15,000 Italian leather sofa. Feathers from destroyed custom pillows floated through the air like snow, settling on Persian rugs now shredded beyond repair. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Central Park, but Blackstone barely noticed any more. His attention was consumed by the massive black and tan tornado destroying everything in sight. Thunder, stop! Blackstone's voice cracked with exhaustion and desperation. The dog paused momentarily, his amber eyes meeting his owner's with an intensity that sent chills down Blackstone's spine. Those eyes held no malice, only a wild, desperate panic that Blackstone recognized all too well. It was the same look he'd seen in his own mirror during his darkest business failures, the same terror he'd felt when his empire nearly crumbled 5 years ago. But understanding didn't stop the destruction. Thunder resumed his rampage, powerful jaws clamping down on the leg of a Chippendale dining chair. The antique, worth $30,000, cracked like a twig. Blackstone's hands instinctively moved to protect his forearms, already covered in a roadmap of scars from previous attempts to restrain his companion. Each mark told a story of failure, his failure to help the animal who'd somehow become a reflection of his own broken soul. The penthouse that had once graced the covers of Architectural Digest now looked like a war zone. Custom artwork hung in tatters, their golden frames bent and twisted. The smart home system, controlled by Blackstone's own company's technology, flickered erratically as Thunder had somehow damaged the wiring during one of his wall-climbing episodes. Even the bulletproof windows installed after Blackstone received death threats from business rivals showed scratch marks from Thunder's desperate attempts to escape. Blackstone's phone buzzed incessantly on the marble kitchen island. His assistant Sarah had stopped calling after midnight, but the emergency alerts from his building's security system continued. His neighbors in the exclusive building, including a federal judge, a Broadway star, and the heir to a pharmaceutical fortune, had filed formal complaints. The co-op board was threatening legal action. His own company's stock had dipped 3 points last week when news of his personal issues leaked to the press. The irony wasn't lost on him. Richard Blackstone, the man who'd revolutionized artificial intelligence and built a tech empire worth $12 billion, couldn't control one traumatized dog. He who debugged the most complex algorithms, negotiated with world leaders, and solved problems that stumped entire teams of PhD graduates, was defeated by 90 minutes of sleep and a German shepherd's nightmares. Thunder had arrived 6 months ago through Blackstone's charitable foundation. The dog was found chained in an abandoned warehouse, his ribs showing, his spirit seemingly broken. 3 different families had adopted and returned him, each claiming he was impossible and aggressive. The shelter was ready to euthanize him when Blackstone, in a moment of misguided compassion, decided to give Thunder one last chance. That decision had cost him 3 live-in housekeepers, 2 personal assistants, and his sanity. The first housekeeper, a sweet grandmother from the Philippines, lasted exactly 6 days before Thunder cornered her in a closet for 3 hours. The second, a former military medic who claimed she could handle anything, quit after Thunder destroyed her car keys and trapped her overnight. The third never even unpacked. She took one look at Thunder's bared teeth and called an N. Uber. Professional help had been equally useless. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, Manhattan's most exclusive animal behaviorist, charged $500 per hour to tell Blackstone that Thunder suffered from complex trauma requiring intensive behavioral modification. Her 12-week program cost $18,000 and resulted in Thunder becoming more aggressive, not less. Marcus Chun, the celebrity dog trainer featured on 3 reality shows, lasted 2 sessions before Thunder destroyed his van full of training equipment. Even Blackstone's own therapist, Dr. Patricia Hoffman, had suggested that Thunder might be reflecting his owner's emotional state. Sometimes, she'd said during their last session, our pets become mirrors for our own unresolved trauma. Blackstone had fired her the next day, but her words echoed in his sleep-deprived mind. Now, standing in his destroyed home at nearly 4 a.m., watching Thunder pace like a caged tiger, Blackstone felt something crack inside him. Not just exhaustion or frustration, but something deeper. The control that had defined his entire life over his companies, his wealth, his carefully crafted public image had completely evaporated. He was at the mercy of an animal who seemed as lost and desperate as he sometimes felt beneath his billionaire facade. His thumb hovered over his phone screen, the Twitter app glowing in the darkness. Blackstone had 2.8 million followers who hung on his every word about technology, business, and innovation. They saw him as a visionary, a man who could solve any problem with enough data and determination. What would they think of him now, defeated by a dog in his own home? Thunder's howling resumed, a sound so primal and heartbroken that it seemed to echo from the depths of some ancient pain. The noise bounced off the penthouse walls, amplifying until Blackstone felt it vibrating in his chest. His neighbors' complaints, his board meetings, his reputation, none of it mattered anymore. All that existed was this moment, this desperate animal, and a man who'd forgotten how to surrender control. With shaking fingers, he began typing, $1 million cash to whoever can calm this beast within 24 hours. I'm dead serious. He stared at the words for a long moment, knowing that hitting send would change everything. His carefully maintained privacy would shatter. His business rivals would pounce on any sign of weakness. The media would have a field day with Manhattan's billionaire brought low by a dog. But as Thunder's amber eyes met his again, those wild, desperate, achingly familiar eyes, Blackstone realized he was already at rock bottom. The only way out was through. He hit send. Within seconds, his phone exploded with notifications. The post was being shared, liked, and commented on faster than his sleep-deprived brain could process. He'd just turned his private hell into a public spectacle, but for the first time in months, he felt something approaching hope. Maybe someone out there understood what he and Thunder needed. Maybe someone could save them both. The notification sound from Blackstone's phone had become a relentless digital drumbeat by 6:30 a.m. What started as a desperate 3 a.m. tweet had transformed into a global phenomenon, faster than a viral TikTok dance. His phone screen showed numbers that made his sleep-deprived mind struggle to comprehend. 847,000 retweets, 2.3 million likes, and climbing so rapidly the counter seemed broken. Sarah Chun, his long-suffering assistant, arrived at the penthouse looking like she'd been hit by a freight train. Her usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, her designer blazer wrinkled from sleeping in her car outside the building since 4 a.m. when the first news van arrived. She clutched 3 phones, 2 tablets, and a coffee that had long gone cold. "Mr. Blackstone," she said, her voice strained to breaking point. "We have a situation." Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the scene below looked like a movie premiere gone wrong. News trucks from CNN, Fox, NBC, and international outlets lined Fifth Avenue. Reporters thrust microphones at anyone entering or leaving the building. A helicopter circled overhead, its camera undoubtedly broadcasting live footage of his penthouse to millions of viewers worldwide. The building's doorman, Jorge, looked overwhelmed as crowds pressed against the velvet ropes that normally kept curious tourists at bay. The phones haven't stopped ringing, Sarah continued, scrolling through her tablet with frantic swipes. Good Morning America wants a live interview in 30 minutes. The Today Show is offering exclusive access. TMZ has a reporter trying to bribe the building maintenance staff for access to the service elevator. And that's just traditional media. She pulled up social media feeds that made Blackstone's head spin. Hashtag Thunder Challenge was trending #1 worldwide, beating out a presidential scandal and a celebrity divorce. Hashtag $1 Million Dog had spawned countless memes, with Thunder's growling face superimposed on everything from motivational posters to dating app profiles. TikTok was flooded with people filming their own dogs with captions like, "Thunder could never," and "My dog would win that million." But it wasn't all entertainment. The story had struck something deeper in the collective consciousness. Animal rescue organizations were sharing Thunder's background, explaining how shelter dogs often develop behavioral issues from trauma and abandonment. Veterinary behaviorists were offering expert commentary about canine PTSD. Mental health advocates drew parallels between Thunder's struggles and human trauma responses. "Look at this," Sarah said, showing him a trending hashtag. Hashtag Save Thunder and Richard. People aren't just seeing this as a publicity stunt anymore. They're genuinely concerned about both of you. The celebrity responses were equally overwhelming. Ellen DeGeneres had shared the tweet with a heartfelt message about animal rescue. Oprah's production company had called offering to feature the story on her network. Even Jeff Bezos had commented, "Sometimes the hardest problems require the most unexpected solutions. But for every supportive voice, there were 10 critics." PETA had issued a statement calling the challenge exploitative and dangerous to animal welfare. Celebrity trainer Victoria Stillwell tweeted that turning a traumatized animal into entertainment trivializes real behavioral issues. Animal rights activists were planning protests outside the building, claiming Blackstone was treating Thunder like a circus act. The professional inquiries were even more staggering. Sarah's 3 phones buzzed constantly with calls from people claiming they could solve Thunder's problems. The famous dog trainer from the Netflix series Dogs and Their Humans demanded a $50,000 appearance fee just to walk in the door. A Hollywood animal trainer who'd worked on Marvel movies insisted he could cure Thunder in 3 hours using proprietary techniques developed for aggressive wolves. Cesar Millen's people called 6 times, Sarah reported, her exhaustion evident. He's flying in from Los Angeles and wants to film the entire session for a primetime special. The producers are already talking about streaming rights and merchandising deals. International interest was equally intense. A famous dog psychic from Germany claimed she could communicate telepathically with Thunder's past life trauma. Monastery in Tibet offered to send a monk who specialized in calming aggressive animals through meditation. The Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals in London requested permission to document the process for educational purposes. The building's management was in crisis mode. Mrs. Vanderbilt from 42B had called the co-op board demanding Blackstone's immediate eviction, claiming the media circus was destroying property values. The building's insurance company was questioning whether their policy covered incidents related to viral social media challenges. Security had to call in reinforcements to manage the crowds, and the doormen were working double shifts. Blackstone's business was feeling the impact too. His company's stock had jumped 12% overnight as investors speculated about the publicity value of his viral moment. His marketing team was split between those who saw it as brilliant brand management and others who worried about his professional reputation. His board of directors had called an emergency meeting for that afternoon. Thunder, oblivious to his new internet fame, continued his destructive routine. His morning rampage had claimed $8,000 modern art sculpture and left claw marks on the hardwood floors that would require professional refinishing. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that while millions of people debated how to calm Thunder, he remained as agitated as ever. The most disturbing calls came from people offering alternative solutions. A Texas oil baron suggested putting the animal down and donating the million to charity instead. Several private military contractors implied they had methods for neutralizing aggressive animals that were more permanent than training. These calls left Sarah visibly shaken and Blackstone questioning whether his desperate tweet had unleashed something darker than he'd intended. By noon, the story had evolved beyond a simple challenge. News outlets were running exposes on the dark side of animal rescue, the pressure on wealthy philanthropists to solve problems with money, and the ethics of turning personal struggles into public entertainment. Behavioral experts were offering free consultations. Genuine animal lovers were sharing their own rescue stories, and armchair psychologists were analyzing both Blackstone and Thunder from afar. The mayor's office called, concerned about public safety and the strain on city resources. The police commissioner warned that the crowds were becoming unmanageable and might require riot control measures. Fire marshals were worried about building capacity with so many media personnel trying to gain access. But perhaps the most unexpected response came from children. Kids were drawing pictures of Thunder and mailing them to the building. Elementary schools were starting fundraising campaigns to help other rescue dogs. A kindergarten class in Ohio sent a video message telling Thunder they hoped he would feel better soon and find someone who understands him. As Blackstone stood in his destroyed penthouse, watching the chaos unfold 60 floors below, he realized he'd created something much bigger than a publicity stunt. His moment of desperate vulnerability had touched a nerve in the collective human, experienced the universal struggle with trauma, the desire for connection, and the hope that even the most broken souls could be healed. The question now was whether anyone among the thousands of people clamoring for attention could actually deliver on that hope, or whether he'd just turned his private hell into a very public spectacle that would end in disappointment for everyone involved. Thunder's amber eyes seemed to ask the same question as he watched the helicopters circling outside like mechanical vultures, waiting for the next chapter in this unlikely story to unfold. The parade of professional humiliation began at precisely 8 a.m. with Marcus the dog whisperer Chun, whose platinum-plated confidence evaporated the moment he stepped off the private elevator. Chun, who commanded $10,000 just to walk through the door and had never met a dog he couldn't tame, brought an arsenal of equipment that looked more suited for a space mission than dog training. His custom van, wrapped with images of him surrounded by perfectly behaved canines, had barely parked before Thunder sensed the invasion. From 60 floors up, the dog's howls could be heard echoing through the building's ventilation system like an air raid siren. Chun's assistant, a nervous young woman clutching a tablet full of behavioral charts, visibly trembled as they rode the elevator to what she would later describe as entering the gates of hell. Every dog speaks a language, Chun announced to the live stream cameras he'd insisted on bringing. I just happened to be fluent in all of them. His signature leather jacket, embroidered with gold thread spelling Alpha Master, caught the morning light as he unpacked his revolutionary equipment. Sound therapy devices worth $15,000 sat alongside electromagnetic field generators that supposedly reset canine brain patterns. His piece de resistance was a custom-designed dominance projection collar that he claimed could establish pack hierarchy within minutes. Thunder's response was immediate and devastating. The massive German Shepherd appeared in the hallway like a black and tan missile, his 120 pounds of muscle and fury focused entirely on the intruder who dared bring strange devices into his territory. Chun's first mistake was attempting to establish alpha eye contact, a technique that worked perfectly on television, but proved catastrophic in reality. Thunder interpreted the direct stare as a challenge and responded accordingly. The sound therapy devices, designed to emit calming frequencies that supposedly spoke to dogs' primal instincts, became Thunder's first victims. The expensive equipment scattered across the marble floor like technological confetti as Thunder's powerful jaws crushed circuit boards and scattered acoustic crystals worth $500 each. Chun's electromagnetic field generator sparked and died as Thunder's claws found the power cord, his territorial rage amplified rather than diminished by the alien sounds. "Maintain alpha stance," Chun shouted to his trembling assistant while backing toward the elevator. "Show no fear." His commands rang hollow as Thunder cornered him against the floor-to-ceiling windows, the dog's amber eyes reflecting a primal intelligence that saw right through Chun's manufactured dominance. The live stream audience watched in horrified fascination as Manhattan's most expensive dog trainer was reduced to a whimpering man pressed against bulletproof glass. Chun's dramatic exit, clutching the remains of his shattered equipment, while Thunder howled victory from the penthouse, went viral within minutes. The hashtag Chun vs Thunder spawned countless memes showing the trainer's terrified face superimposed on movie scenes of epic defeats. His reputation, built over 2 decades and 3 reality TV shows, crumbled faster than his electromagnetic field generator. Dr. Patricia Mills arrived next, her credentials impressive enough to intimidate most clients before they even met. Columbia University PhD in animal psychology, author of Healing the Traumatized Canine Mind, consultant to 3 different zoo systems, and personal behaviorist to celebrities whose dogs had their own Instagram accounts with millions of followers. Her approach was cerebral rather than confrontational. She planned to read Thunder's psychological landscape and develop a comprehensive treatment protocol. Her mistake was bringing a briefcase full of assessment tools. Dr. Mills entered the penthouse with the confidence of someone who had spent 15 years studying canine behavioral patterns in controlled laboratory settings. She carried specialized cameras designed to track eye movement, stress detection sensors that monitored heart rate through proximity, and a collection of standardized stimuli designed to trigger specific emotional responses. Her plan was to spend 3 hours conducting a complete psychological evaluation before designing Thunder's treatment plan. Thunder had different plans. The moment Dr. Mills opened her briefcase and began assembling her eye-tracking equipment, Thunder recognized the clinical nature of her approach. The dog had endured too many examinations, too many people treating him like a subject rather than a sentient being. His response was swift and targeted. He knocked over her equipment cart, sending $20,000 worth of behavioral assessment tools crashing to the floor, then systematically destroyed each device with surgical precision. Dr. Mills found herself trapped in Blackstone's guest bathroom for 3 hours, calling her graduate assistant to research aggressive response patterns in traumatized rescue animals, while Thunder maintained vigil outside the door. Her eventual rescue required 2 building security guards and a distraction involving Blackstone's emergency stash of premium steaks. Her professional assessment, delivered from the safety of the elevator, was brief. This animal requires intensive pharmaceutical intervention and possible institutionalization. Third failure belonged to Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison, retired Navy SEAL and founder of Alpha Dog Military Training Systems. Morrison's approach was purely tactical. He viewed Thunder not as a traumatized animal, but as an enemy combatant requiring neutralization through superior strategy and overwhelming force. His company's motto, "Breaking bad dogs through superior firepower," was embroidered on his military-style uniform. Morrison arrived with equipment that looked more suited for urban warfare than dog training. Tactical restraint devices, military-grade noisemakers, and what he called non-lethal compliance tools filled multiple cases wheeled in by his two assistants, both former military personnel who treated the mission with the seriousness of a hostage rescue operation. "In the military, we don't negotiate with enemies," Morrison announced to the gathered media. "We establish dominance through superior tactics and overwhelming response. This dog will submit or be contained." Thunder's military education began immediately. The confrontation lasted exactly 7 minutes and 43 seconds, timed by Morrison's tactical watch until the moment Thunder launched himself from the top of Blackstone's grand piano in a move that would have impressed parkour athletes. Morrison's superior tactics crumbled when faced with 120 pounds of airborne German Shepherd who had apparently learned advanced combat maneuvers from his previous encounters with supposed experts. The former Navy SEAL, trained to handle terrorists and international criminals, found himself outmaneuvered by a dog who seemed to understand military tactics better than most recruits. Thunder used the penthouse's architecture like a three-dimensional battlefield, bouncing off walls, using furniture as launching platforms, and employing what Morrison would later describe as advanced guerrilla warfare techniques. Morrison's evacuation required paramedics when Thunder's final assault sent him tumbling down the marble staircase leading to Blackstone's lower level. His tactical equipment lay scattered throughout the penthouse like the remnants of a defeated army, while Thunder stood triumphant among the wreckage, his tail actually wagging for the first time in months. Apparently, he enjoyed the military challenge. The live-streamed failures became internet legend within hours. Compilation videos of Thunder Destroys the Experts topped YouTube trending lists. Social media exploded with commentary ranging from humorous to horrified. Animal rights activists used the footage to highlight the failures of traditional dominance-based training. Military forums debated Morrison's tactical errors with the seriousness of analyzing historical battles. But perhaps most damaging was the growing narrative that Thunder wasn't just aggressive, he was intelligent, strategic, and seemingly immune to conventional approaches. Each expert's failure only reinforced the growing belief that this challenge was impossible, that Blackstone had created a spectacle that would end in disappointment and possibly tragedy. As evening fell on the third day, Blackstone surveyed his destroyed penthouse and the emotional wreckage of supposedly world-class professionals. His million-dollar challenge had become a million-dollar disaster, and Thunder seemed more agitated than ever. The dog's amber eyes held a new intensity, not just fear and aggression, but something approaching triumph. He had defeated the best humanity had to offer, and everyone was watching. The question haunting everyone involved was whether the next challenger would finally succeed, or whether Thunder's reign of victory would continue until Blackstone was forced to admit defeat and face the unthinkable alternatives that some callers had already suggested. Thunder's howl echoed through the night, no longer sounding like desperation, but like the call of a king who had claimed his throne and dared anyone to try taking it from him. 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez had always been different, but in the cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, she shared with her grandmother Rosa. Different wasn't something to be fixed, it was simply who she was. While other children her age obsessed over video games and social media, Emma found herself captivated by the story unfolding on her grandmother's old tablet, watching the same clips of Thunder over and over until she'd memorized every detail of his desperate amber eyes. Rosa Martinez worked 3 jobs to keep their small world intact. By day, she cleaned offices in Manhattan's financial district, invisible to the wealthy executives who stepped around her mop bucket without acknowledgement. By night, she cleaned medical buildings in Queens, scrubbing floors in sterile hallways that smelled of disinfectant and broken dreams. On weekends, she worked at a local laundromat, folding other people's clothes while Emma sat quietly in the corner, drawing in her worn sketchbook with crayons worn down to stubs. Emma's autism had been diagnosed when she was 4, after months of Rosa fighting with school administrators, who insisted her granddaughter was simply defiant or attention-seeking. The diagnosis came with a mountain of paperwork, therapy recommendations that insurance wouldn't cover, and specialists who spoke about Emma as if she weren't in the room. Rosa had learned to navigate the system with fierce determination, advocating for her granddaughter with a strength born from raising 5 children of her own and losing her daughter Emma's mother to a car accident 3 years earlier. But what the specialists couldn't measure, what their tests and assessments missed entirely, was Emma's extraordinary connection with animals. In their neighborhood, where stray cats outnumbered working streetlights and abandoned dogs roamed in small packs, Emma had become something of a legend. Mrs. Chun from the corner store called her La Pequega, Encantadora, the little enchanter, because of her ability to calm even the most aggressive strays. There was Miguel, a scarred pit bull mix who'd been abandoned when his family moved away. The dog had terrorized the neighborhood for weeks, overturning garbage cans and snapping at anyone who came too close. Animal control had been called multiple times, but Miguel was too smart and too fast to be caught. Emma had found him hiding under a rusted car, shivering despite the summer heat. She'd sat on the sidewalk 20 feet away and hummed the same melody her mother used to sing, never looking directly at him, never trying to approach. 3 hours later, Miguel had crept close enough to sniff her hand. Within a week, he was following her home, and Rosa had quietly adopted another mouth to feed. Then there was Luna, a pregnant cat who'd taken refuge in their building's basement, hissing and clawing at anyone who tried to help. The super wanted to call animal control, but Emma had asked Rosa for permission to try. She'd spent her lunch money on cat food for a week, leaving small portions near Luna's hiding spot while humming softly and drawing pictures in her sketchbook. When Luna finally approached, thin and desperate, Emma had sat perfectly still while the cat examined her with suspicious green eyes. Luna eventually allowed Emma to pet her, and when her kittens were born 2 weeks later, Emma was the only human Luna trusted to be near them. Emma's gift wasn't magic or training, it was recognition. She saw in these damaged animals the same overwhelming fear she felt when the world became too loud, too bright, too much. When her classmates' voices rose too high during lunch, when the fluorescent lights flickered too rapidly, when unexpected changes disrupted her carefully ordered world, Emma experienced the same desperate need to escape that she recognized in every stray's eyes. The morning Emma first saw Thunder's story on the Spanish news channel, she was sitting at their small kitchen table, carefully organizing her colored pencils by shade while Rosa prepared for her early shift. The reporter was discussing the impossible challenge and the vicious dog that experts can't control. But Emma didn't see vicious, she saw terrified. In Thunder's amber eyes, in the way he paced and destroyed everything around him, she recognized the same panic she felt during her worst meltdowns. "Myra, Emma," Rosa said, shaking her head at the television. "Rich people and their problems. $1 million for a dog when children go hungry." But Emma wasn't listening to the commentary about wealth and spectacle. She was studying Thunder's body language, the way his ears flattened against his head, how his massive frame seemed to curl in on itself despite his aggressive display. She'd seen the same posture in Luna before her kittens were born, in Miguel during thunderstorms, in herself when the world became too overwhelming to bear. For 3 days, Emma watched every news update, every social media clip, every amateur analysis of Thunder's behavior. She filled page after page in her sketchbook with drawings of the German Shepherd, not the snarling monster the media portrayed, but the frightened animal she saw beneath the aggression. In her pictures, Thunder was smaller, softer, his eyes filled with sadness rather than rage. Why does everyone try to be loud around him? Emma asked Rosa one evening as they watched footage of the military trainer's spectacular failure. "He doesn't like loud things." Rosa paused in her dinner preparation. looking at her granddaughter with the mixture of pride and concern that had become her default expression. Emma rarely spoke about the things she observed on television, preferring to process the world through her drawings and humming. When she did offer commentary, it was usually profound in its simplicity. "What do you mean, Mia?" Emma pointed at the screen with a colored pencil. "All the people trying to help him are being loud and scary. They're bringing things that make noise and trying to make him look at them. But he doesn't want to look at anyone. He wants them to go away." Rosa sat down beside her granddaughter, looking at Emma's latest drawing. Unlike the professional behavioral assessments that had cost Blackstone thousands of dollars, Emma's artwork told a different story. She'd drawn Thunder not as a dominant alpha or a traumatized victim, but as a creature seeking the same thing Emma craved during her most difficult moment: space, quiet and understanding without demands. "Maybe someone should try being quiet around him," Emma continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe someone should just sit with him without wanting anything." That night, after Rosa had left for her evening shift, and Emma was supposed to be sleeping, she sat by their apartment's single window and watched the distant lights of Manhattan. Somewhere in that glittering cityscape was Thunder, probably pacing and afraid, surrounded by people who wanted to fix him instead of understanding him. Emma made a decision that surprised even her. "Abuela," she said the next morning, as Rosa prepared for another day of cleaning other people's messes. "I want to help the sad dog." Rosa paused, her weathered hands still gripping her cleaning supplies. In 3 years of raising Emma alone, she'd learned to take her granddaughter's quiet pronouncements seriously. Emma didn't make requests lightly, didn't ask for things she didn't truly need. "Mia, that's not our world. That's rich people with big problems and expensive solutions." Emma showed Rosa her sketchbook, filled with dozens of drawings that captured something the professional experts had missed. In Emma's artwork, Thunder wasn't a problem to be solved, but a soul-seeking connection on his own terms. "I think I understand him," Emma said simply. "I think he's scared like me sometimes." Rosa looked at her granddaughter, this small, quiet child who'd been through more loss than most adults, who navigated a world that often seemed designed to overwhelm her, who somehow found ways to heal the broken animals others had given up on. Emma's success with Neighborhood Strays wasn't coincidence or luck. It was recognition, empathy, and a patience that came from understanding what it meant to be misunderstood. "They probably won't even let us in the building," Rosa said, but Emma could hear the consideration in her voice. "Maybe," Emma agreed, "but maybe they will." The next morning, Rosa called the number that had been plastered across every news channel. When the assistant answered, clearly exhausted from days of managing the circus surrounding Thunder's challenge, Rosa's voice was steady despite her nervousness. "My granddaughter thinks she can help your dog," she said in careful English. "She has autism, and she's very good with scared animals." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Sarah had fielded thousands of calls from people claiming they could solve Thunder's problems. Celebrity trainers, animal psychics, military specialists, even a circus performer who trained tigers. But something in this grandmother's quiet sincerity, the mention of a child who understood being different, made her pause. "How old is your granddaughter?" Sarah asked. 8, Rosa replied. "But she sees things others don't see." As Sarah wrote down their information and scheduled a meeting that everyone assumed would end like all the others, neither she nor Rosa could have predicted that this quiet phone call would change everything. Emma, sitting beside her grandmother and humming softly while drawing another picture of Thunder, this one showing him sleeping peacefully, knew something the experts had missed. Sometimes the smallest voices carried the deepest understanding, and sometimes the most broken hearts knew exactly how to heal each other. The elevator ride to the 60th floor felt like ascending to another planet. Emma pressed herself against the mirrored wall, overwhelmed by the golden fixtures. crystal buttons, and the soft classical music that seemed to emanate from invisible speakers. Her small hand gripped Rosa's calloused fingers, while her free arm clutched the worn canvas messenger bag that held her most precious possessions. Her sketchbook, a set of colored pencils worn down to nubs, and a small stuffed elephant named Peanut that had belonged to her mother. Rosa wore her best dress, a navy blue polyester piece she'd bought at Goodwill for Emma's school graduation, and her only pair of dress shoes, which pinched her feet after 12-hour shifts, but made her feel worthy of this impossible moment. She'd braided Emma's long black hair with extra care that morning, weaving in a ribbon that had cost $2 at the corner store, money that should have gone toward groceries, but felt necessary for this once-in-a-lifetime encounter. When the elevator doors opened with a soft chime, they stepped into a war zone that masqueraded as luxury. Blackstone's penthouse, worth more than Rosa would earn in 50 lifetimes, bore the scars of Thunder's ongoing battle against the world. Chunks of marble missing from walls, scratch marks scoring the hardwood floors like abstract art, and the lingering smell of expensive destruction hanging in the air like incense in a ruined cathedral. Sarah Chun looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Her usually pristine appearance was disheveled, her designer suit wrinkled from camping out in the office, and her eyes held the hollow look of someone who'd watched too many disasters unfold in real time. She'd fielded over 3,000 calls in 4 days, each one promising to be the solution to an impossible problem. When she saw Rosa and Emma emerge from the elevator, this grandmother, in her discount store dress, and the tiny girl who seemed to shrink into herself under the weight of attention, Sarah's professional skepticism warred with desperate hope. "Mrs. Martinez?" Sarah's voice carried exhaustion and barely concealed disbelief. "And this is Emma?" Emma didn't respond to the introduction. Instead, she stood perfectly still, her dark eyes scanning the destroyed penthouse with an intensity that made the adults uncomfortable. While Rosa explained their presence in careful English, Emma processed the environment like a detective reading crime scene evidence. She noted the claw marks' height and pattern, the specific pieces of furniture that had been targeted, the way natural light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows. But most importantly, she listened to the silence between Thunder's distant growls, reading the emotional temperature of a space where fear and frustration had become the dominant languages. The media presence was overwhelming. News cameras lined the hallway, their operators hoping to capture the next spectacular failure for their evening broadcasts. Photographers with telephoto lenses crowded near the windows, treating Thunder's story like a sporting event with million-dollar stakes. Celebrity trainers who'd already failed stood in small groups, their expensive equipment scattered around them like the remnants of defeated armies. The air buzzed with the electrical tension of people watching for disaster. Blackstone himself looked like a man on the edge of complete breakdown. His usually immaculate appearance had deteriorated over the past 4 days. Designer stubble couldn't hide the exhaustion etched into his face, and his casual clothes hung loose on a frame that had shed weight from stress and sleepless nights. His hands showed fresh bandages from Thunder's latest aggressive encounters, and his eyes held the hollow desperation of someone who'd watched his last hope dwindle with each expert's failure. When he first saw Emma, his reaction was visceral disbelief, mixed with something approaching anger. This was his million-dollar challenge, his last resort, his final attempt to save both himself and Thunder from an impossible situation. The parade of failures had included internationally renowned experts, television personalities, and specialists with decades of experience. Now his assistant had brought him a child, a small, quiet girl in second-hand clothes who looked like she'd rather disappear than be the center of attention. "Sarah," Blackstone said, his voice strained with barely controlled frustration. "What exactly are we doing here?" Before Sarah could respond, Thunder announced his presence with a sound that made everyone freeze. His howl started low and guttural, building to a pitch that seemed to vibrate through the building's steel structure. It wasn't just noise. It was communication, a complex expression of rage, fear, and territorial warning that spoke of deep psychological wounds and primal desperation. Emma's reaction was unlike anything the adults had witnessed. While everyone else tensed, stepped back, or reached for protective barriers, Emma simply tilted her head and listened. Her expression shifted from nervous anxiety to something approaching recognition, as if Thunder's cry contained information that only she could decode. "He's not angry," Emma said quietly, her voice barely audible above the echoing howls. "He's telling everyone to stay away because he's scared." The simplicity of her observation cut through the room like a blade. Here were adults who'd spent days analyzing Thunder's behavior through complex psychological frameworks, designing elaborate intervention strategies, and implementing expensive technological solutions. But Emma heard something they'd all missed: desperation masquerading as aggression, fear dressed up as dominance. Thunder appeared in the hallway like a force of nature, his massive frame filling the doorway with kinetic energy that made the air itself seem dangerous. At 120 pounds of muscle and fury, he moved with the fluid grace of a predator who'd learned that attack was the only reliable defense. His amber eyes swept the room, cataloging threats and escape routes with the efficiency of a military tactician. When his gaze fell on the usual collection of strangers and their equipment, his lips curled back to reveal teeth that had ended the careers of supposed experts. But when Thunder's eyes met Emma's, something unprecedented happened. Instead of the direct stare that professionals use to establish dominance, Emma looked at Thunder with the soft, indirect gaze she used with all frightened animals. She didn't try to make him submit or acknowledge her authority. She simply saw him not as a problem to be solved or a challenge to be conquered, but as a fellow creature overwhelmed by a world that demanded too much. Emma's response to Thunder's intimidating presence was to slowly lower herself to the marble floor, cross her legs, and open her sketchbook. The action was so unexpected, so contrary to every expert approach they'd witnessed, that the entire room held its breath. She didn't speak to Thunder, didn't offer treats or commands, didn't try to establish any kind of relationship. She simply existed in his space without making demands. The media cameras zoomed in, expecting another dramatic confrontation. The failed experts whispered among themselves, predicting this child would flee in tears within minutes. Blackstone stood frozen, watching his $1 million challenge potentially end with the trauma of a little girl being terrorized by his impossible dog. But Emma understood something the experts had missed. Thunder's aggression wasn't about dominance or territory. It was about overwhelming sensory input and emotional overload. Every stranger who entered his space brought expectations, energy, and demands that triggered his fight or flight response. Emma, who'd spent her life managing her own sensory overwhelm, recognized the signs immediately. As Thunder stood in the doorway, muscles tensed for another confrontation, Emma began to hum. The melody was barely audible, a soft tune her mother had sung during bedtime stories, passed down through generations of Rodriguez women as a lullaby for troubled children. Her voice was thin and sweet, carrying none of the authority or confidence that trainers use to command attention. Instead, it offered something Thunder had never encountered in this space: peace without expectations. The big dog's ears twitched, then gradually lowered from their aggressive position. His breathing, which had been rapid and shallow with adrenaline, began to slow. For the first time since arriving at Blackstone's penthouse, Thunder heard a human sound that didn't demand anything from him. Emma continued humming while opening her sketchbook to a fresh page. With movements so gentle they seemed choreographed to avoid startling nervous wildlife, she selected a worn blue-colored pencil and began to draw. Her strokes were confident despite their softness, creating the outline of a dog that looked remarkably like Thunder but peaceful. lying in a sunny meadow instead of prowling through a destroyed penthouse. The room remained frozen in disbelief as Thunder took his first hesitant step forward, then another. His massive paws made no sound on the marble floor as he approached the strange small human who offered no challenge, no threat, no demands for submission. For the first time in months, Thunder's tail wasn't rigidly straight with aggression. It hung in a neutral position that suggested curiosity rather than fury. As the cameras rolled and the world watched, an 8-year-old girl with autism and a traumatized German shepherd began the most unlikely conversation anyone had ever witnessed. One conducted entirely in the language of patience, understanding, and the radical concept that sometimes healing begins not with expertise, but with simple acceptance. Time seemed to slow to the rhythm of Emma's gentle humming as Thunder approached with movements so careful they defied his reputation as an unstoppable force of destruction. The massive German shepherd's amber eyes remained fixed on this small human, who had introduced something entirely foreign to his world, the absence of expectation. Every person who had entered his territory over the past 4 days had come with agendas, equipment, and the aggressive energy of those determined to impose their will. Emma brought only a worn sketchbook and a melody that seemed to come from some ancient place where fear had no power. The penthouse, which had echoed with the sounds of professional failure and expensive destruction for days, fell into a silence so profound that the distant hum of Manhattan traffic 60 floors below became audible. News cameras zoomed in with telephoto lenses, their operators afraid to breathe too loudly, lest they disturb what appeared to be the impossible unfolding in real time. The failed experts clustered together like defeated generals, studying a battle they couldn't comprehend, their expensive theories crumbling as they watched an 8-year-old girl accomplish what their combined decades of experience had failed to achieve. Emma's humming continued without variation, a soft constant that seemed to create an invisible bubble of calm around her small frame. The melody was simple, just a few notes repeated in a pattern that had soothed generations of Rodriguez children through nightmares and storms. But in this moment, surrounded by the wreckage of Thunder's rage and the desperate hopes of watching adults, it became something approaching sacred music. Rosa stood frozen near the elevator, her weathered hands clasped in prayer position, whispering silent appeals to saints and her departed daughter. She had witnessed Emma's gift with neighborhood strays countless times, but this felt different, more dangerous, more important, more likely to end in heartbreak. The weight of $1 million, international attention, and her granddaughter's safety pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden she wasn't sure she could bear. Blackstone watched from across the room, his own breathing synchronized with Thunder's gradually slowing rhythm. For months, he had existed in a state of constant vigilance, waiting for the next explosion of destruction, the next failure, the next expensive reminder of his inability to help the animal he'd tried to save. Now, observing Emma's radical approach, he began to understand how his own desperate energy had been feeding Thunder's anxiety rather than alleviating it. Thunder reached the edge of Emma's invisible circle and stopped, his massive head tilted at an angle that suggested curiosity rather than aggression. Up close, the damage from his traumatic past was visible in ways that distant observations had missed. Scars crisscrossed his muzzle from fights with other abandoned animals. His ears bore the notched evidence of neglect and abuse. His eyes, while no longer filled with rage, held depths of sadness that spoke of repeated betrayals by humans who had promised safety and delivered abandonment. Emma's colored pencil moved across the paper with strokes so gentle they whispered rather than scratched. Her drawing evolved slowly, each line deliberate and unhurried. She was creating not just an image of Thunder, but a vision of who he could become, a dog lying peacefully in a sunlit meadow, his powerful frame relaxed, his expression content rather than vigilant. It was therapy through art, healing through imagination, hope rendered in blue and green-colored pencil. The silence stretched for 20 minutes, then 30, then 45. Sarah Chun found herself holding her breath so long she became dizzy, while camera operators switched to backup equipment to avoid the mechanical sounds of rewinding film. The very air in the penthouse seemed to thicken with possibility, as if reality itself was being rewritten by a child's patience and a dog's desperate need for understanding. Thunder's transformation was so gradual, it was almost imperceptible. His rigid stance softened by degrees. His breathing deepened from shallow pants to the steady rhythm of relaxation. The aggressive set of his ears shifted to neutral, then to the forward position that indicated interest rather than threat. Most remarkably, his tail, which had remained rigidly straight with tension for months, began to lower until it hung in the relaxed position that suggested peace rather than warfare. When Thunder finally took the step that brought him within touching distance of Emma, the watching world seemed to inhale collectively. Here was the moment of truth, the instant when the challenge would either succeed spectacularly or fail catastrophically. Millions of viewers watching live streams held their breath as 120 pounds of supposedly uncontrollable fury approached a 65-pound girl whose only protection was her absolute faith in the power of gentle presence. Emma never stopped humming, never looked up from her drawing, never acknowledged that she was making history. When Thunder's wet nose touched her small hand, the same hand that had been offered to countless neighborhood strays with patient love, she remained perfectly still. She let him investigate her scent, her warmth, her humanity, without imposing any agenda of her own. In a world that had taught Thunder that all human contact came with strings attached, Emma offered connection without conditions. The moment Thunder's massive head lowered to rest near Emma's crossed legs, cameras around the world captured something unprecedented, the successful calm of an animal everyone had declared impossible to reach. But more than that, they documented the power of approaching trauma with understanding rather than force, of meeting aggression with acceptance rather than dominance. Emma continued drawing, adding details to her peaceful vision of Thunder, while the real Thunder experienced peace for the first time in months. Her soft humming wove through the silence, like a gentle river carrying away years of accumulated pain and fear. She drew flowers around the imaginary Thunder, trees that provided shade, birds that sang without threat. It was a world where safety was assumed rather than fought for, where rest was possible rather than dangerous. The failed experts began to understand what they had missed. Their approaches had all focused on changing Thunder's behavior through various forms of pressure, psychological, physical, or pharmaceutical. Emma's revolution was simpler and more profound. She changed nothing and accepted everything, creating space for Thunder to change himself. Dr. Patricia Mills, still nursing bruises from her bathroom imprisonment, whispered to a colleague, "She's not training him. She's just being with him." The observation carried the weight of revelation, the recognition that sometimes healing requires presence rather than intervention, acceptance rather than modification. Marcus Chun, his expensive equipment scattered throughout the penthouse like the remnants of a failed invasion, found himself questioning decades of dominance-based training philosophy. Watching Emma's success, he began to see how his aggressive techniques had triggered rather than resolved behavioral problems. The child was teaching the expert, demonstrating that true leadership sometimes meant following rather than leading. As the first hour passed with Thunder lying peacefully beside Emma, Blackstone felt something shift in his own chest, a loosening of tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. For months, his penthouse had been a battlefield where every interaction with Thunder was a potential crisis. Emma had transformed it into something approaching sanctuary, proving that the environment of a relationship mattered as much as the techniques employed within it. Thunder's breathing had synchronized with Emma's humming, creating a rhythm that seemed to pulse through the entire penthouse. His amber eyes, while still alert, no longer held the hypervigilance of a creature expecting attack. Instead, they reflected something approaching trust, not in humans generally, but in this specific small human who asked nothing and offered everything. When Emma finally looked up from her drawing, her movement was so gradual, it seemed choreographed to avoid startling nervous wildlife. She showed Thunder her artwork, his peaceful alternate self, rendered in gentle strokes of colored pencil. For the first time since arriving at Blackstone's penthouse, Thunder's tail moved in, what could only be described as a tentative wag. The revolution was complete, achieved not through expertise or expensive equipment, but through the simple radical act of meeting a traumatized soul with patient, unconditional acceptance. In a world obsessed with quick fixes and dramatic interventions, an 8-year-old girl had proved that sometimes the most powerful healing happens in silence, when two damaged hearts recognize each other and choose connection over fear. The second hour brought revelations that would reshape everything the watching world thought they knew about healing, connection, and the profound wisdom that can emerge from the most unexpected sources. Emma remained cross-legged on the cold marble floor, her small frame dwarfed by Thunder's massive presence, but her quiet confidence filled the space around them like an invisible force field that kept the chaos of the outside world at bay. Thunder had settled into a position that would have been impossible to imagine just hours earlier, his powerful body relaxed against the floor, his great head resting mere inches from Emma's knee, his amber eyes tracking her gentle movements with something that could only be described as trust. The transformation was so complete that even the most skeptical observers found themselves questioning their understanding of animal behavior, trauma response, and the nature of healing itself. Emma began to speak, her voice so soft that the sophisticated audio equipment had to strain to capture her words. She didn't address the cameras, the experts, or even the adults watching in stunned silence. Instead, she spoke directly to Thunder, her tone carrying the same patient gentleness she used with all creatures who had been hurt by a world that moved too fast and demanded too much. "I know what it's like when everything feels too loud and scary," she whispered, her small hand moving to sketch additional details in her drawing, a shelter beneath spreading oak trees where her imaginary Thunder could retreat when the world became overwhelming. "Sometimes people don't understand that we're not being mean. We're just trying to feel safe." The words hit Blackstone like a physical blow, cutting through months of frustration and failed interventions to reveal a truth so simple it had been hiding in plain sight. He had been treating Thunder's behavior as aggression to be controlled rather than communication to be understood. Every destroyed piece of furniture, every intimidating display, every act of seeming defiance had been Thunder's desperate attempt to create the safety that had been stolen from him through abandonment and neglect. Rosa watched her granddaughter with a mixture of pride and heartbreak that brought tears to her weathered cheeks. She recognized the wisdom in Emma's words because she had witnessed her granddaughter's own struggles with a world that often seemed designed to overwhelm sensitive souls. Emma's meltdowns at school, her retreat into silence when crowds became too dense, her need for routine and quiet spaces, these weren't character flaws to be corrected, but coping mechanisms that deserved respect and accommodation. "People tried to make you do things their way," Emma continued, adding soft clouds to her drawing. "But maybe their way felt scary because it was too much at once." She paused in her sketching to look at Thunder with her characteristic indirect gaze, the soft focus that made nervous animals feel seen rather than scrutinized. "I think you just needed someone to understand that you do things differently." Like me, Dr. Patricia Mills found herself fumbling for her notebook, desperate to capture insights that challenged everything she had learned in 15 years of clinical practice. Here was a child with no formal training, providing a masterclass in trauma-informed care, demonstrating principles that academic texts struggled to convey. Emma's approach wasn't just effective, was revolutionary in its simplicity and profound in its implications for how professionals approached behavioral interventions. The media presence, which had begun the day expecting another spectacular failure to add to their collection of viral content, found themselves documenting something unprecedented. Live stream viewers from around the world watched in silence as the narrative shifted from entertainment to education, from spectacle to profound human truth. Comment sections that had been filled with jokes and bets began flooding with personal stories of trauma, neurodivergence, and the healing power of acceptance. Emma's grandmother moved closer, her courage overcoming her intimidation of the luxurious space and the watchful cameras. She knelt beside her granddaughter, her presence adding another layer of calm to the ever-expanding circle of peace that seemed to emanate from Emma's patient presence. In rapid Spanish, she whispered words of encouragement and pride, her voice carrying the musical cadences of love that transcended language barriers. "Mia, you have a gift," Rosa said softly, switching to English so the watching world could understand. "You see with your heart what others miss with their eyes." Emma nodded without looking up from her drawing, adding a stream to her peaceful landscape where Thunder could drink cool water without fear of being disturbed. "Abuela always says that being different isn't being broken," she explained to Thunder, her words carrying wisdom far beyond her 8 years. "She says sometimes different people and different animals just need different kinds of love." Blackstone found himself moving closer, drawn by the magnetic pull of witnessing genuine healing in action. For months, his penthouse had been a prison of mutual trauma, his own desperate attempts to fix Thunder, reflecting his inability to fix the broken parts of himself. Emma's presence had transformed the space into something approaching sacred ground, where acceptance replaced control and understanding trumped domination. Thunder's response to Emma's gentle monologue was unlike anything he had demonstrated since arriving at the penthouse. His breathing had deepened into the relaxed pattern of genuine rest, his powerful muscles releasing tension that had been held for months. Most remarkably, he began to make soft sounds, not the aggressive growls and threatening barks that had characterized his previous communications, but gentle whimpers and sighs that spoke of emotional release rather than intimidation. "He's telling me about being scared," Emma translated, her voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone she used when stating obvious truths that adults somehow missed. "He's scared that if he stops watching everything, something bad will happen again. But he's tired of being scared all the time." The revelation struck the assembled experts like lightning, illuminating the fundamental flaw in their approaches. They had all focused on Thunder's behavior without addressing the underlying fear that drove it. Emma had instinctively understood that healing trauma required addressing the root cause rather than managing the symptoms. Marcus Chun, his expensive equipment scattered like the remnants of failed strategies, found himself kneeling beside the small circle of peace, his voice barely above a whisper. "How did you know?" he asked Emma, his professional pride dissolved in the face of her inexplicable success. Emma considered the question with the serious attention she gave to all adult inquiries, her colored pencil pausing in its gentle strokes. "I know because I feel scared sometimes too," she said simply. "When people try to make me look at them or talk when I don't want to, it makes everything feel too much. So I think Thunder feels too much sometimes, and everyone was making it worse by trying to make him be different." The profound simplicity of her explanation reverberated through the penthouse like a stone dropped in still water, creating ripples that would extend far beyond this single moment. Emma had identified the core principle that had eluded teams of specialists. Effective intervention required meeting individuals where they were, rather than demanding they adapt to predetermined methods. Thunder shifted his position, moving even closer to Emma until his massive head rested gently against her small shoulder. The gesture was so tender, so completely at odds with his reputation as an uncontrollable force, that several observers found themselves openly weeping at the beauty of the connection. "See?" Emma said, adding a rainbow to her drawing. He just needed someone to sit quietly with him and not want him to be different. Sometimes that's all any of us need. As the third hour began with Thunder, sleeping peacefully beside the small girl who had accomplished the impossible, Blackstone realized that he was witnessing more than the solution to his million-dollar challenge. Emma had demonstrated a new paradigm for healing, one based on acceptance rather than modification, understanding rather than control, and the radical notion that the most profound changes often happen when we stop trying to force them. The watching world had tuned in expecting entertainment and discovered education, hoping for spectacle and finding something approaching spiritual truth. In the gentle space created by a child's patience and a traumatized animal's desperate need for understanding, they had witnessed the birth of a revolution that would transform how humanity approached the healing of wounded souls. 6 months later, the penthouse that had once echoed with destruction now hummed with the quiet sounds of healing. Emma's twice-weekly visits had become the anchor point around which both Thunder and Blackstone rebuilt their shattered worlds, each session teaching them new languages of patience, understanding, and the radical power of acceptance without conditions. The $1 million check had been ceremoniously presented to Rosa and Emma in a moment that broke television viewership records. But the real treasure was the transformation that continued to unfold long after the cameras stopped rolling. The check itself had changed everything for the Rodriguez family, but not in the ways the watching world might have expected. Rosa had quit 2 of her 3 jobs, keeping only her weekend position at the laundromat because she genuinely loved the community of women who gathered there to share stories while folding clothes. The cramped Queen's apartment had been replaced by a modest house in Astoria, with a backyard large enough for the animal sanctuary that Emma had dreamed about since she was 5 years old. Emma's Haven, as the sanctuary came to be known, operated on principles that revolutionized animal rescue. Instead of focusing on quick adoptions and behavioral modification, the facility specialized in patient rehabilitation for traumatized animals who had been deemed unadoptable by traditional shelters. Emma's approach, sitting quietly with frightened creatures, humming soft melodies, and creating art that envisioned their peaceful futures, became the foundation for a new therapeutic model that attracted veterinary behaviorists and animal psychologists from around the world. The sanctuary's first permanent resident was Miguel, the scarred pit bull who had terrorized Emma's old neighborhood before she taught him that not all humans would hurt him. He now served as a therapy dog for children with autism, his own journey from aggression to gentleness, providing hope for families struggling with misunderstood behaviors. Luna and her kittens had found homes through the sanctuary's unique matching process, which paired animals with families based on energy compatibility rather than convenience. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation belonged to Thunder himself. Under Emma's patient guidance and Blackstone's newfound understanding of trauma-informed care, the German Shepherd evolved from a destructive force into a certified therapy animal whose story inspired rehabilitation programs across the globe. Thunder's journey from penthouse prisoner to healing companion was documented in a best-selling book that Blackstone wrote, with all proceeds funding Emma's expanding sanctuary network. The twice-weekly sessions that had begun as desperate attempts to calm an aggressive dog had developed into something approaching sacred ritual. Emma would arrive at the penthouse after school, her canvas bag still containing the same worn sketchbook and colored pencils, though now supplemented by art supplies that Blackstone insisted on providing. Thunder would meet her at the elevator, his tail wagging with genuine joy rather than the desperate energy that had once characterized his every movement. Their routine had become a masterclass in therapeutic relationship building. Emma would settle into her favorite spot near the floor-to-ceiling windows, the same location where she had first demonstrated the power of patient presence. Thunder would position himself beside her, his massive frame relaxed in a way that still amazed everyone who remembered his previous incarnation as an unstoppable force of destruction. Together, they would sit in comfortable silence, Emma drawing peaceful landscapes, while Thunder dozed in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through windows, no longer marked by desperate claw scratches. Blackstone had become both student and financial supporter of Emma's revolutionary approach. The billionaire tech mogul, who had built an empire through aggressive innovation and relentless problem-solving, discovered that his greatest success came from learning to step back and create space for healing to happen naturally. His penthouse, once a battlefield between human desperation and canine trauma, had been transformed into a peaceful sanctuary where two species learned to communicate through patience rather than force. The Emma Foundation, established with an initial endowment of $50 million from Blackstone's personal fortune, had grown into an international network of programs connecting neurodivergent children with rescue animals. The Foundation's core principle, that healing happens through acceptance rather than modification, challenged traditional approaches to both animal training and autism intervention. Emma served as the Foundation's Chief Inspiration Officer, a title she had chosen herself because it made her giggle and accurately described her role in helping others see possibilities they had never imagined. Research partnerships with major universities were documenting the neurological benefits of Emma's approach, discovering that the slow, patient interactions she favored activated healing responses in both human and animal brains. The gentle humming, the indirect eye contact, the absence of pressure or expectations, these techniques were being studied and replicated in therapeutic settings around the world, creating new treatment modalities for trauma recovery. Thunder's own transformation had become legendary in animal behavior circles. The dog who had once required sedation for basic veterinary care now worked as a therapy animal in children's hospitals, his calm presence providing comfort to young patients facing their own overwhelming challenges. His particular gift was working with children who, like Emma, experienced the world differently. Kids with autism, sensory processing disorders, and anxiety conditions who found in Thunder's patient understanding the acceptance they rarely encountered in their daily lives. The media attention that had initially focused on the spectacle of $1 million dog challenge had evolved into something more meaningful. Documentary filmmakers, researchers, and journalists from around the world came to study Emma's methods, but they invariably left talking about larger questions of empathy, neurodiversity, and the healing power of genuine acceptance. Emma's story had become a catalyst for conversations about different ways of being in the world and the value of approaches that honored rather than tried to fix natural variations in how brains and hearts functioned. Emma herself remained remarkably unchanged by her fame and fortune. She still preferred quiet spaces and gentle routines, still communicated through art and humming as much as through words, still saw the world through the lens of someone who understood what it meant to be different. Her drawings had evolved, and sophistication art teachers now visited the sanctuary to learn from her intuitive techniques, but her core message remained beautifully simple. Every creature deserved to be met where they were rather than forced to become something else. On the 6-month anniversary of their first meeting, Emma sat in her familiar spot in Blackstone's penthouse, now redecorated with soft furnishings and calming colors that reflected their understanding of how environment affected emotional regulation. Thunder lay beside her, his breathing synchronized with her gentle humming as she worked on a new drawing, this one showing a world where all the different animals and children lived peacefully together, each valued for their unique ways of experiencing life. Blackstone watched from across the room, his phone buzzing with calls from reporters wanting updates on the story that had changed his life. But his attention remained focused on the quiet miracle happening near his windows, where a small girl and a once broken dog continued to teach the world that the most profound healing often happened not through expensive interventions or expert techniques, but through the simple, revolutionary act of offering unconditional love to souls who had been told they were too different to deserve it. As the afternoon sun streamed through windows that now framed hope instead of desperation, Emma added the final touches to her drawing, a rainbow arcing over the peaceful world she had envisioned, its colors bright with the promise that even the most broken hearts could learn to trust again when met with patience, understanding, and the radical belief that being different was not the same as being damaged. The $1,000,000 challenge had been won, but the real victory was ongoing, a daily choice to approach the world with the kind of gentle wisdom that could transform fear into trust, isolation into connection, and trauma into the foundation for deeper compassion. In the end, Emma had given the world something worth far more than money, proof that healing was always possible when someone cared enough to sit quietly in the darkness and hum until the light returned.